Today was supposed to have been preached here last week, but this only happened one other time since I started in ministry. With about 2 days before Sunday, it was very obvious that Jackie and I were not going to be back in town. So I called Brother Ben, and I said, "You're up Sunday." This guy, Ben Godley, some of you heard the message. If you haven't, you should. He's got 2 days to prepare. So Jackie and I, we're in another state. We're watching this thing on the phone. And it just, as I'm listening, I just said, if anybody doesn't think this guy can preach, they need to go to a doctor. They need some medicine or therapy or psychiatrist or something. That guy, 2 days, I'm envious. Takes me 2.5. And I've been doing it a long time. So thanks to Ben. If you didn't listen to last week's message, it was out of the park. Ever since the Old Testament time, when people went to the temple because they worshiped God, or they went to the synagogue, or they went to the tabernacle, that was the church of the day. Then in the New Testament, it became the church. Since that time and up until today, people have wondered about contributing to the work of ministry, to God's work. And Paul, the apostle, he spoke to this issue in 1 Corinthians 16:1. Let me tell you how he dealt with it. He said, "Now regarding your questions about money being collected for God's people in Jerusalem," people were asking about giving to and through the local church. He said, "You should follow the same procedure that I gave to the churches in Galatia." There's a pattern of how to give. Verse 2. "On the first day of each week, you should each put aside a portion of the money that you've earned. Don't wait until I get there and then try to collect it all at once." What was Paul saying in that? It's very simple. Works for you, works for me, works for all of humanity. What we put to last typically gets less. That's just the way it works. You know, people say, "I'm going to save the best for last." Usually we put the best up front. And that's the way it is in giving. If we wait until everything else is paid, typically God gets leftovers, and the scriptures are clear, and I've been giving this to you week after week. God never blesses leftovers. He always blesses first fruits. So what Paul was telling people is, take care of God's portion first, and then take care of the rest, and then you'll see blessings come. So at the end of the message today, you're going to have an opportunity here live in the room to give as bowls are passed. If you're online, you're listening to us live stream, I think there's going to be some things pop up there that you can also give online, so thank you for that. Okay, the question for the day, and this series is questions people ask about God. Well, the question for today is a good one. Why do bad things happen to good people? It's kind of neat. Let me talk to you about movies for just a minute. Because if you want to watch a movie with somebody who will ruin a movie, watch a movie with me. Because I ruin movies for Jackie all the time. Now, not when we're in the theater. Because I don't do like some of you that I've actually seen do, talk through the whole movie. Or worse yet, think that if you turn the brightness down on your phone, nobody's going to see it. I mean, we're talking about 2 hours. Can you go? Who in the room actually has a phone and can go 2 hours without looking at it? Anybody? Put your hands down, you bunch of lying people. If you're over 30, God bless you, you weren't lying. Under 30, you can't go. Turn your phone off for 2 hours. I challenged somebody to do that a while back, under 30. I said, just turn your phone off for 2 hours. They said, I didn't know there was a button to turn it off. That has nothing to do with this message. We're back to movies. In every movie, it's the same way it is since the Garden of Eden. There's good guys and bad guys. That's the way you can watch an animated movie, and there's always a good guy, there's always a bad guy. So here's what happens when I start watching a movie. I start wondering about the bad guy. And I wonder out loud. I love the Avengers, the series, not the comic books because you actually have to read something. I like to watch the movies. In the Avengers, there are a lot of bad guys. I just looked some up. Baron Zemo, Diablo, Doctor Doom, Electro, Graviton. I love that. Living Laser, Mole Man, and Ultron. There are a lot more bad guys in the Avengers series, but my favorite of all time is Loki. Yeah, and the reason I like Loki, I think the character is Tom Hiddleston. Is that it? Well, okay, if you don't know, that sounds good anyway. Loki is a bad guy, but Loki's cool. I mean, he's mean as a snake, but Loki, I don't know how it works, but I'm watching our first Avengers. We didn't go to the movie. We had it at home, and I'm looking at Loki, and I just said, Jackie, I said, that guy's got a great smile. I said, man, I love that. I wish I had that guy's smile. And she didn't even, she's just looking at the screen, because she knows what's coming. If she answers me, she's in trouble. So she's looking at the screen. I said, how does he get a smile like that? How do bad guys get, I said, you think those are caps? You think they're veneers? Do bad guys go to the dentist? Do they have to pay, or do they just say, fix my teeth? And the dentist is, I said, how does that, and she's starting to, come on, quit doing that. And it just keeps going and going. He wears this hat. He wears a regular hat, but these big horns. And I want to know, so I asked Jackie, I said, how do you think he keeps that hat on his head with those horns stuck out there? And you think the bobby pins, how does that work? You think he could be a bad guy without the horns? Because he's a good-looking guy, but the horns look more stupid than they do bad. So, I'm just wondering these things. And then I say, what does he do at the end of the workday? What does he do if he has to go to the bathroom during the middle of a confrontation? Does he say, heck up, time out, gotta go? I don't know these answers, so I'm asking my wife, and she hates it. She just finally leaves the room. She can't take it anymore. I have these questions about bad and about good. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. Here's what I found by watching the Avengers. I found that in the Avengers, bad things happen to good guys. I also find out that bad things happen to bad guys. Some really bad stuff happened to Loki. And we think, well, that's okay because he's a bad guy. But when bad things happen to the good guys, it makes us feel bad. And that's the way it is in life. There's not one bit of difference. Art imitates life. Bad things happen to good people. But bad things happen to bad people. I think the real question that we have is not a question at all. I think it's a statement. When we ask, why do bad things happen to good people? I think what we're really saying is this: bad things should not happen to good people. Bad things should happen to bad people. And I vote yes on that. I'm all in. I think that's where we're really going. But it brings up another question. If bad things should happen to bad people and good things should happen to good people, who gets to decide? Who gets to decide who's good and who's bad? Well, I can, and then you can. You like to decide who's good and bad, or maybe the government can, maybe God can. Who gets to decide who's good and bad? You've heard of John Gotti. John Gotti was a mobster. Died in 2002. Seemed like just yesterday. Died in 2002 in prison. And everything you see about John Gotti's life, if you read anything about his life, outside of when he was a little boy, John Gotti did some really bad things. John Gotti was not a good man. He had 5 children. They're all still living. And if you look at interviews by these children, at some point, each of his children, Angela, Victoria, John Jr., Frank, and Peter, every one of them have said, our dad was a good man. No, he wasn't a good man. He was a mobster. He was a murderer. Did all kind of bad things. But his kids say, our dad was a good man. Who gets to decide on who's good and who's bad? So you see how difficult it is to answer the question, why do bad things happen to good people? I've tried before to be the decider. And then once I got to know the person, I thought they were bad, and then I found out they were good, or I thought they were good, and then I found out that they weren't so good. See, my family, I think my family would say, Eric's a good guy. But there are people out there, they think I'm a horse's rear end. Did you hear that real light? Amen. So, I think I recognize the voice. You know, Mom, that was embarrassing. Who gets to decide who's good and bad? That's where it starts getting sticky. It's a fair question, and it makes it really hard to answer why do bad things happen to good people. So what I did for the rest of the message, I tried to shift the question just a little bit, and I tried to ask this question: why do bad things happen, period? Now, that's a little bit easier to answer. We can answer that sociologically, philosophically, religiously. We can go in a lot of different directions. I can take you back to the Garden of Eden. Not going to do that. You can read Genesis chapter 3, and you can kind of see how Satan comes into the world. Adam and Eve start to disobey God, and bad things start happening to some good people. I can blame things on Satan, which sometimes that's just the way to go. I can blame things on demons. Sometimes we do bad things, and Satan's probably saying, I didn't do it. I didn't have anything to do with that one. Sometimes it's just our utter stupidity that causes good people to do bad things. Sometimes we learned a couple weeks ago, it's genetic. It goes from generation to generation. So all of these things can sometimes answer the question, why bad things happen. But here's what I found. None of that matters when it's happening to you. Why doesn't matter when it's happening to you, or when it's happening to somebody you care about. So even if we can answer the question, why do bad things happen, period, that leaves us a little dry. Kind of want a little something else. So here's what I've concluded. And I spent right much time on this. Here's what I've concluded. Why do bad things happen to good people? I don't have any idea. And I don't think anybody else does either. Now, I can tell you a little bit about why bad things happen. There's enough Bible evidence to tell you that. Sometimes we can even pinpoint why bad things happen. So what I did, I shifted the question again, and I'm believing that the question I'm going to give you next is the only one that matters. And I hope this is the question you'll take with you today. And it's simply this: how should we respond when bad things happen to good people? At the end of this message, at the end of our service, you're going to see how a group of young people from our church are getting ready to respond when bad things happen to good people. We didn't make it this way, but they will be a living example of what I'm talking to you about today. Because all that really matters is how we respond to the bad things that are happening. Because the truth is this, in your life and in mine, bad things are going to happen to good people. Bad things are going to happen to bad people. We know that. Can't stop it. But what we can do is we can respond. We can help. So you might have somebody in your life right now that's going through some really bad things. You might have the ability to take that bad away. And even if you don't, you have the ability to do something. I remember a story. A little boy's out skateboarding with his friends, and one of the kids, he falls off the skateboard and breaks his arm. And this little kid, he goes home and he's telling his mom about the story. He said, yeah, my friend, he fell and broke his arm. And he said, everybody ran to his house to get his mom to come back and help him. And his mom said, well, did you go with them to get his mommy? No, I didn't go. And she said, what did you do? And he said, well, I stayed back, and he said, I put my arm around him and I helped him cry. Everybody can do something. I learned most about this question, not from a Christian, but from a rabbi. That's a Jewish preacher, priest type guy. His name's Aaron Moss. He lives in Australia. He's got a great website, answers a lot of questions from the Old Testament side of life. I want to share with you what he says about why bad things happen to good people. It's the best thing I've ever heard, and it changed the way I see it. Here's what he writes. He says, "You're bothered by the fact that bad things happen to good people, as you should be. Any person with an ounce of moral sensitivity is outraged by injustice in our world. Abraham," he brings up, "the first Jew, asked God, should the judge of the whole world not be fair with people?" Quite a bold statement. Aaron Moss, he says, "Moses asked, God, why have you treated your people so badly?" Make me a little nervous to ask that, but they were trying to figure out why bad things happen to good people. He says this, "But what if we found the answer? What if someone came along and gave us an explanation of why bad things happen to good people? What if the mystery were solved? What if we asked why and we got an answer? God gave us an answer. He said nothing could be worse for us." That doesn't make sense because we want to know why bad things happen. And here's a Jewish rabbi saying nothing could be worse if we knew. He said if the question were answered, then we could make peace with the suffering of innocents, and that would be horrible. If we actually knew why bad things had happened to good people in another state, many of the youth in our church would never be getting on a van to go anywhere today to help anybody because they would understand why it had happened. Moss continues. He says, worse than innocent people suffering is when others watch their suffering unmoved, and that's exactly what would happen if we understand why bad things happen to good people. We would no longer be bothered by their cries. We would no longer feel their pain because we would completely understand that there was a reason all of it was happening. And then he gives an illustration, and it's a powerful one. He said, imagine you're walking down a corridor of a hospital and you hear a woman screaming with pain inside of a room. And outside of her room, her family's standing there. They're chatting, they're smiling, and they're happy. And you walk over to them and you say, what is wrong with you people? Can't you hear how much pain this lady's in? And they look at you and they say, this is a delivery ward. She's having a baby. Of course we're happy. Moss says when you have an explanation, pain doesn't seem so bad anymore. We can tolerate suffering when we know why it's happening. So he said, if we could make sense of good people suffering, we could live with it. We'd be able to hear the cry of a person in pain and not be horrified because we would understand the reason. But he said, as long as the pain of good people remains a question, we're bothered by it. Listen, he says, as long as we can't explain pain and sickness, we will work to beat it. So he tells us, keep asking the question, why do bad things happen to good people? But stop looking for answers and start formulating your response. Take your righteous anger, turn it into a force for good. Let your outrage propel you into action. When you see innocent people suffering, help them, because that's why we are here. It's the best I've ever heard. It's your response when bad things happen that matters, not the why. It's your response. Now, that's what you can do for other people. What about when the bad things are happening to you? I would tell you, pretty much stop trying to figure out why and start figuring out what you're going to do. Start saying, God, I don't know why this is going on, but I just need to know what to do next. I need to know where to go next. I need to know who to talk to next. I need to know how to pray next. I need to know what to do. Start formulating your response. You might find some ways to get rid of the pain. It might be a simple change, a behavior change. An eating change. Stop doing this, start doing this. It might be a relationship change. You might find a way to get better in all of that, but listen, you might not. So what are you going to do then? If the pain won't go away, what are you going to do then? Let me tell you. In Daniel chapter 3, I have a lot of favorite places, but Daniel chapter 3 is one of my favorites. There's a good Bible story. If you grew up in Sunday school, you've heard it, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. You ought to read that one today. It's a miracle of God. But you got these three guys. They're in love with God, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then you've got a king, Nebuchadnezzar, who doesn't love God. He loves Nebuchadnezzar. He's all into it for himself, and he's the king, so he can do what he wants to do. And he got an idea one day. He said, I want people to worship me. So I'm going to build a big statue of me, and then we're going to play some music. And when the music plays, he's telling his army this. He says, I want everybody in my kingdom to get on their knees and worship the statue. So that's what happened. They built the statue. The music played. Everybody gets on their knees except for three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're not going to get on their knees. They're not going to worship any idol because they love God. Problem was, Nebuchadnezzar liked these guys. So he calls them in and he said, man, you're making me look bad. So he said, maybe you didn't hear me. And he explained it to him again. He said, look, all you got to do, just do right. Just get on your knees when it's time. And I love their response. In verse 16, Daniel 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it very clear to you, your majesty, we will never serve your gods. We will never worship the gold statue that you've set up. These three men, they were good people. And Nebuchadnezzar had them thrown into the furnace. That's bad. Now, the miracle of the story is, and as you read the rest of it, God reached into that fire and he saved them and he pulled them out of that fire and they were untouched. And you're thinking, well, that hasn't happened for me. Bad things happen to me and God didn't reach down and pull me out. What do I do then? Well, I think about a story in the New Testament, a man named John the Baptist. This was a guy that Jesus once said, no human being ever born of a woman is greater than John the Baptist. John the Baptist was a really good guy, and he was preaching some things that people didn't like. And they said, you keep preaching this stuff, we're going to kill you. And you would think that the same God who pulled Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out of the fire, of course he's going to rescue John, who's the best guy who's ever lived. And right in the middle of his greatest preaching ministry, lives are changing all around John. He's going to change the world for Jesus. They cut his head off. Why do bad things happen to good people? I don't know. How we respond to it makes all the difference. And that's all I can tell you about that. So when you see bad things happening, make a response. Do something. Just do something. Before we go to the offering, next week, by the way, we're going to answer the question, what happens to a person who dies and they've never heard of God? They've never been presented the gospel of Jesus Christ. What happens to that person? I'll give you some answers on that. That doesn't have to be you, however. If you're sitting with us live today, if you're live streaming anywhere around the world and you have never made Jesus Christ the Lord of your life, why not do that today? Just do it right now. I mean, we don't have all the answers. Christians don't have all the answers, but we know who the answer is, and his name is Jesus Christ. If you have never surrendered your life to Christ, ask forgiveness for your sins, ask Jesus to come into your life, why don't you do that today and start living the kind of life God wants you to live? Let me pray over our offering that we're getting ready to take and pray over your life. And then praise team will come up and do a song. And then we want to launch some of our youth out and into their mission. So let's pray. God, our greatest hope today is that someone answered that very simple call to the gospel. That we, as a church, join with other churches around the city, around the state, around the world, in presenting Jesus Christ, risen from the grave, proved by so many to have died, was buried, and came to life again. And that event is the one event that we hinge everything on in the church, that anyone who said yes to this living Jesus, if they ask forgiveness for their sins, if they ask Jesus into their heart, Lord, would you let people know all over the world this morning, no matter where they are, what they've done, where they're going, anyone who's invited Jesus into their hearts, I pray that they would start to feel His presence like never before. God, many who have given their lives to Jesus, they're going to give some first fruits this morning. They're going to give off the top. They're going to tithe. Maybe one or two or some for the first time. Scary. But God,